This is section 1.3, and today we're going to be talking about the midpoint and the distance formula. So to brush up a little bit on just some vocab, the midpoint of a segment is the point that divides a segment into two congruent segments. So it just chops it in half. And when we do segments, we add this little tick mark to say that they are congruent. So M is the midpoint of AB, just practicing our notation. So that means that AM is congruent to MB. That is congruent to that. It also means that AM is equal to MB. So remember, this is letters when we were talking about things being congruent, and this would be numbers. So if I knew how long they were, if they were like 7 inches, I could say both of them are 7 inches. They are equal to each other. A segment bisector is just a point array or a segment, a line or a plane that intersects the segment at its midpoint. So it just chops it in half. So not only can a midpoint chop something in half, so can another ray, segment, anything like that can cut it in half. As long as I have the tick marks, it tells me that things are equal. And so CD is, again, the bisector of AB. Nothing changed there. We now know that that chunk is equal to that one. So AM is congruent to MB. And that also means that AM is equal to MB. So the same kind of stuff. Again, letters congruent, numbers equal. A couple of examples, quick. We've got 2 1/4 here on this tick mark, which means that this tick mark is also 2 1/4. And they want me to find the whole thing. So the whole thing is these two added together. So 2 1/4 and 2 1/4 gives me 4 1/2. Next up, we tell you that M is the midpoint. Find the length of VM. So with that midpoint and those two tick marks, it means that 4x minus 1 has to equal 3x plus 3. So quick solving this, moving 3x over leaves me an x. And moving the 1 over leaves me a 4. Of course, they didn't want me to solve for x. They wanted me to find VM. So I just have to plug my 4 back in. 4 times 4 is 16, minus 1 is 15. Next up is the midpoint formula. Whoops. And the midpoint formula just helps you if you have two endpoints that you can find the middle. And it's kind of like averaging two test scores. If I had a low and a high, and in order to average them, I would add them up and divide by 2. And that's what we're going to do. So the midpoint formula says that you take your x's, add them up, and divide by 2. Then you take your y's, add them up, and divide by 2. So the endpoints of RS, and I'm just going to sketch a picture real quick. The endpoints are 1, -3, and 4, 2. So in order to do the midpoint formula, I just have to add my x's and divide by 2. Add my y's and divide by 2. Do a little simplifying here. You get 5 halves and -1/2. Now you can switch this to decimals if you want, so 2.5 and then -0.5. Either answer is fine. The next one says the midpoint of JK is. So they've already given me the midpoint. So here's J and K, and M is the midpoint, and it's at 2, 1. J is at 1, 4. What they want me to find are the coordinates of K. And I'll have lots of students stop reading as soon as they see the word midpoint, and they would find the midpoint between that point and that point, which is actually that right there, which we aren't interested in. So make sure that you read the whole sentence and decide, am I finding an end point or am I finding a midpoint? So now we're using the midpoint formula in a different way. If this is in the middle, that means if it took, or whatever it takes to get out to that x, I have to do the exact same thing to get to that x. If from the middle I'm 5 miles away, then I have to be 5 miles away in both directions. So we look at J and we say, what would it take for a 1 to turn into a 2? And you would just have to add 1 to get there. So we'll do that exact same pattern again. In order to get there, you have to add 1. So that would be 3. Doing the same thing with the y's. To get from 4 to 1, you would minus 5. Sorry. Oh, 4 to 1. My bad. You're minusing 3. I don't know why I thought that was negative. And then you'll do it again. So 1 minus 3 is -2. So there's my new point. Last thing is the distance formula. And this is now telling you how far it is between 2 points. So how long is that segment? So you have your 2 points, x2, y2, x1, y1. And in the formula, you subtract them and square, and then you subtract and square. This one's a little more convoluted in terms of what we need to do for work. And you also got to pay attention quite a bit to your minus signs and your negatives. Excuse me. Because stuff is going to end up canceling out. So we'll start right here. Distance formula is, and I'm just following this formula exactly. It says take your x2 minus your x1. So I'll make this x2, this x1. Square it and add your y's. So this has to be y2 and this has to be y1. So -1 minus 3. Doing some simplifying, 4 minus 2 is 2. And -1 minus 3 is -4 squared. 2 squared is 4 plus 16. So this is the square root of 20. And that's legit. If you need to write it in decimal, that's fine too. But you can give me the square root of 20. That will work. So today was all about being a midpoint and what that means, how it cuts a segment into two congruent halves, and then about the midpoint formula, and then finally about the distance formula, finding the length between 2 points.